Oh, we will watch some video. Okay.
Sudah mulai bergerak. I'd first of all like to thank President Puigdemont and Fernando Moreno for hosting us here today so we can launch the much awaited European chapter of the International Parliamentarians West Papua. The International Parliamentarians West Papua is a network of parliamentarians from around the world. The IPWP also has individual chapters in parliaments including the UK, New Zealand and Spain. We have a network of vice chairs including ones from the Pacific, Iberia, Southern Europe, Africa, Scandinavia and of course President Puigdemont here in the European Parliament. Recent IPWP work has focused on human rights in West Papua. As you heard from Benny and just see in the video, the human rights situation in West Papua is deteriorating rapidly. And no external mission of any sort has been to West Papua since the World Council of Churches in February 2019. The IPWP has been increasing international pressure for a visit which was agreed by the United Nations Human Rights Council and Indonesia. But Indonesia has come up with very different bureaucratic reasons to continue to delay the visit of the UNHRC to West Papua. So we've raised questions and motions in various parliaments. And I would like to thank again Carlos Puigdemont for raising questions here to the Vice President and High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Josep Borrell. Where the Vice President Borrell stated the EU encourages Indonesia to allow the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights to visit West Papua and has urged Indonesia to extend standing invitations to all special rapporteurs and mandate holders. This unequivocal statement of support for the visit made on behalf of the EU Commission as the growing number of individual states and regional bodies that have concerns over human rights violations in West Papua and Indonesia's continual denial of access for a visit with the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. These bodies include the Pacific Islands Forum and the Organisation of African, Caribbean and Pacific States, and I'm pleased that there is a representative here from the OACPS. Vice President Josep Borrell also responded to questions raised over the EU's trade agreement with Indonesia, which, as President Puigdemont said, went to its 11th round of negotiations last November, and whether or not Indonesia's human rights record in the context of West Papua will be taken into consideration. He noted ongoing concern with regards to safeguarding of freedoms of expression, association and peaceful assembly in West Papua. And there would need to be a need to respect human rights, and that needs to be embedded in any free trade agreement. With regards to the amount of funds the Commission has allocated to West Papua since 2001, as Benny stated, 4.7 million euros has been sent, covering areas of democracy, civil society, peace process, healthcare, education, land use planning. As we've just seen in the video, those funds may well have been used for suppression of exactly those things, peaceful right of assembly, which you just saw being suppressed by the Indonesian police and military. Borrell also stated that the EU spent 112 million euros funding projects in Indonesia related to climate change, deforestation, education, health and human rights, which include Operations West Papua. And we know that actually the opposite of all those activities has been happening in West Papua, so we need to further look at how those EU funds have been spent. The EU itself has recently adopted a new business and human rights framework which outlines mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence with regards to how funds are spent. In the case of West Papua, this raises questions on how this money has been spent by Indonesia and the obligations the EU has in providing them. The EU should not fund the Indonesian occupation and extraction of wealth from West Papua. The role of the EU here in the European Parliament is to raise questions and ensure that the Parliament's voice is heard at the Commission, and also the EU's voice is heard at the UN in Geneva and New York. That no trade agreement is signed with Indonesia that continues the deforestation of West Papua, that facilitates human rights violations. Today, the best hope to pressure Indonesia to improve the human rights situation rests right here in the European Parliament and in the Commission. We have seen action in individual European parliaments as well. We had a landmark intervention in the Dutch Parliament calling for the UN Human Rights Commission to visit West Papua, which was followed by comments made last year by the Dutch Foreign Affairs Minister Hoekstra, who stated that it is important to have such a visit by the High Commissioner as soon as possible. And the historic role of the Netherlands is particularly important in the context of West Papua. On March 18, 2021, the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Spanish Senate also passed a motion calling on the Spanish government to express its concern about the human rights situation in West Papua and urging the government to also back the High Commissioner visit. In case such a visit being continually blocked, the Senate pushed for the Spanish government to support a motion on West Papua at the UN Human Rights Council, and I urge other EU nation states to support that. In response to a follow-up question raised by Bass Senator and IPWP Vice President Gorka, on the 2nd December, the Spanish government affirmed their support for the visit to go ahead. In reference to long denied access, the response also noted that support to the OHCHR entails a general rejection of any deterrent measure adopted by national authorities to hinder visits and inspections on the ground. This was in addition to a strongly worded motion of support unanimously passed by the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Basque Parliament. Supporting comments have also been made by the UK government. In response to a written question I submitted, Amanda Milling, Minister of Asia, said, "We support the proposed visit of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights to Papua and encourage both sides to agree on dates for a visit. The High Commissioner's Office has said that it still aims to secure access to West Papua, but that obstacles are being placed in its way by the Indonesian state. November 30th last year, the High Commission Office put out a strongly worded statement condemning human rights abuses in West Papua. On February the 1st, the ULMWP Prime Minister of the Provisional Government, Edison Moromi, declared they are ready and waiting to welcome the High Commissioner, and that this is what the West Papuan people need from the international community. As international scrutiny is intensifying, Indonesia is running out of excuses not to allow access to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, and I look to you in the European Parliament for further support. So humbly request that members of the European Parliament write to the EU Ambassador to the UN in Geneva to meet with Michel Bachelet regarding the mission to West Papua. I invite you to join me on the 14th of June for the first IPWP meeting since COVID in London at the UK Parliament, and also to invite members of the European Parliament to consider becoming vice chairs, to encourage their members from national parliaments to become vice chairs. We're particularly looking for vice chairs from parliaments in Benelux, Central Europe, Eastern Europe and the Balkans. If you have any colleagues in national parliaments who'd be interested in hearing more about the cause of West Papua, I'm willing and ready to meet, as I'm sure as President Puigdemont. We're looking to you for support in this important matter. The European Parliament and the European High Commission are the best hope of securing human rights for the people of West Papua. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now it's the floor is for Jojo Mehta.
This discussion, which is very much connected. Our organisation began in 2017 as a grassroots campaign calling for the recognition of ecocide, mass damage and destruction of nature as a crime. Polly herself is sadly no longer with us, but many more were inspired by her example, and 4 years on we now find ourselves at the heart of a fast-growing global cross-sector movement to support including ecocide under international criminal law alongside genocide and war crimes. Our ultimate aim is to create accountability for key decision makers in government and industry, but also a shift in mindset. Since our globally dominant culture is so alienated from the natural world we depend on, that we treat it as an infinite bank of resources to be disposed of as we see fit. And we are now witnessing the consequences of that globally. We all know you can't apply for a license to kill people for your new business, much as in practice such killing can and does happen, as West Papuans are tragically aware. To do so would be both criminal and criminally insane. We need to cultivate a similar, healthy taboo around destroying the natural world if we are to protect the ecosystems that allow us to thrive, and criminal law has the capacity to do that. Making ecocide a crime can provide the legal guardrail to steer us back from the precipice and also to stimulate strategic change in the right direction. We could think of it as a health and safety law for the planet and for ourselves. And it is gaining political traction around the world. The conversation is on public record now at parliamentary and/or government level in 21 ICC member states. Indeed, the Navaran Regional Parliament just passed a resolution supporting ecocide law. Why, you may wonder, am I speaking about this today at the launch of International Parliamentarians for West Papua at the EU? Well, there are two reasons, and allow me to tell you two stories. When we launched in 2017, it was to crowd from the cost of sending Polly Higgins and a small team to the UN in New York, where the International Criminal Court, the ICC, was holding its annual assembly that year. The team were putting on an exhibition and a side event on ecocide in West Papua. As West Papua is home to some of the world's most extensive pristine rainforest, as well as some of the world's biggest reserves of gold and copper, it is no wonder that the subject of ecocide is deeply relevant to the territory. Mines like Freeport have created devastation and pollution on a massive scale. And no wonder that the occupying power covets that territory and will go to criminal lengths to control it. Make no mistake, investing in Indonesian operations in West Papua means supporting severe human rights violations by an armed occupying presence, as our exhibition would show. Our close associates, Forensic Digital Investigation Team Interpret, had correlated satellite mapping of abuses, disappearances, and subsequently abandoned villages in West Papua with the arrival of Indonesian extractive ecocidal projects, mines and palm oil plantations. It was the first time that this correlation had been brought to light, because without the digital satellite evidence, it had not previously been possible to join the dots over space and time, so to speak. And a strange thing happened at the UN in 2017. Whenever our team booked a room for the side event, the booking would mysteriously disappear by the next day. Invitations had to be revised 3 times because of these strange system errors. Still unexplained. Then an even stranger thing happened. Indonesia, which is not an ICC member and therefore did not have the standing to do this, interrupted the plenary session of the Assembly to warn delegates that our side event should not be attended and that it was all lies. Naturally, rather like banning a hit record, this piqued the curiosity of delegates, and a good number of would-be attendees turned up at the designated room, the third one, only to find security guards preventing entry. Why might they have been there? We can only speculate. No counter-evidence to the exhibition materials was forthcoming. As you can imagine, our solidarity with the West Papuans' desire for self-determination and independence, and our affinity with those Pacific sister nations standing with them, in particular Vanuatu, was firmly cemented at that time. Now let's fast forward to November 2021, to COP26 in Glasgow, where our now well-established organisation put on a series of events around ecocide law and finance, ecocide law and climate justice, ecocide law and sacred guardianship of nature. You name it, we related ecocide law to it because the subject touches all those areas. It's truly cross-cutting in its impact. I spent 2 weeks running from one speaking engagement to the next. But there was one event where I found I wasn't teaching, but learning. And it was the West Papuans' launch of their Green State vision. Pledging to take decisive action to address the climate emergency and impact of natural resource extraction in an independent West Papua. It sets out commitments from West Papua's government in waiting, including making ecocide a serious criminal offence. And please note, this would be the first state to make this a cornerstone of its constitutional makeup, so to speak. Restoring guardianship of natural resources to indigenous authorities, combining Western democratic norms with local Papuan systems. Serving notice on all extraction companies, including oil, gas, mining, logging and palm oil, requiring them to adhere to international environmental standards or cease operations. This is a vision that forms the basis for a future in harmony with nature, placing new and long overdue parameters in place to protect both human communities and the wider living world community of which we are an inextricable part. But what inspired me so much about the Green State vision went beyond the remarkable determination of the West Papuans to regain independence and restore respect and care for their beautiful home. What inspired me so deeply was the audacity, the positivity, the generosity of what the West Papuan independence movement is doing by offering this vision to the world. They have every right to denounce the occupiers, to seek justice for the horrific violence and displacements that they've suffered. And yet they do not sit in despair and self-pity. Instead, they have worked together to offer a holistic, practical vision and a genuinely green governance solution to a world that, let's face it, desperately needs a new model. Please, support them in this hugely brave and generous endeavour. I believe wholeheartedly in the proverb that it's always better to light a candle than to curse the darkness. West Papua's candle does more than shine in the darkness. The Green State vision is a beacon for what a future in harmony with the planet and with each other could actually look like. Thank you.
Thank you, Jojo. Thank you very much. And now for our last speakers in the first round, panelists. The floor goes to Ralph Vanu, the leader of the opposition of the Republic of Vanuatu. I hope he's well connected and can hear you. So the floor is yours, Ralph.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. Well, it's good evening from Vanuatu, on the other side of the world. But I'm very honoured to be invited to be part of this presentation. I'm the leader of the opposition in Vanuatu. Previously, I was the foreign minister up until 2020. For the Pacific Islands, West Papua is a long, outstanding issue, and it's a big stain on our region at present. The Pacific Islands region, made up of about 20-something independent states and territories, is probably the last frontier for decolonization in the world. We have a number of non-self-governing territories that are not yet independent. New Caledonia and French Polynesia, for example, are on the United Nations decolonization list, and there is a process of decolonization that is unfolding under the supervision of the United Nations. We also have Bougainville, which is a province of Papua New Guinea, which has now had a referendum last year in favour of independence, and is now going through a process with the government of Papua New Guinea towards independence. We have, of course, the numerous US cross territories in the region. And then, of course, we have West Papua. And the difference with West Papua is that it is a black hole in terms of exposure. not only is the UN Human Rights Commissioner not allowed in, but perhaps equally importantly, international media is banned from the territory. That's important to note because, when we have the war in Ukraine, for example, the international media is there to expose the human rights violations going on, whereas in West Papua, all international media is banned. And the footage you saw in the video earlier is Facebook, people filming with their phones and posting on Facebook. It's the only way information can get out about human rights abuses that are happening there. So the international media ban, as well as a ban on independent assessments of human rights situation there. What we do know is that what has been happening over the last 60 years of colonization by Indonesia amounts to what can be technically and legally termed genocide. We also know that there's mass deforestation happening, and Jojo just talked about that. It's equivalent of large-scale destruction of one of the last remaining lungs of the earth. So in the Pacific Islands, we have been becoming independent very late. For example, my country became independent in 1980. Papua New Guinea, 1975. Solomon Islands, 1979. So quite late is compared to the other regions of the world. The Pacific Islands Forum has consistently raised the issue of West Papua. What happened in 2018, there was a new step taken where the Pacific Islands Forum asked for a visit of the UN Human Rights Commissioner. And the reason for that was human rights violations will continue to be raised and Indonesia continued to deny that they were happening. And so there needed to be an independent assessment on the ground. And this is what was called for. And this call, as Alex has pointed out earlier, has now been picked up as well and made by the Organization of the African, Caribbean, Pacific, the ACP. Upon this visit to the Human Rights Commission happened. In that period, since 2018, since these calls were made, the human rights violations have escalated. The ante is being upped by the fact of this increasing international scrutiny of the situation there. And this is why we're calling upon all states, and particularly the European Union, considering that the former colonizer of the territory is from the European Union. It's important that the European Union also steps up and makes this call and puts the pressure on the Indonesians to address the human rights situation, but also allow for an act of self-determination by the people. This is an historical right of all people, and for example, Vanuatu, we have enjoyed that historical right with our 1979 election, which paved the way for independence. All other countries, all other former colonies in the Pacific and elsewhere have also been able to engage in an act of determination where the people choose their future. This is a historical right and an inalienable right that is denied to the people of West Papua to this day. The world is now beginning to recognize this, that self-determination is an inalienable human right, and it needs to happen in West Papua as it's happened elsewhere. As I mentioned earlier, the intensification of human rights abuses.
Sorry. Richard, can you hear me? Please, could you turn off your microphone, please? Switch off your micro or mute, because it's creating some troubles. We cannot hear you as clear as we expect. So, Ralph, you can continue, please.
Thank you. We now have the ULMWP represented by Benny Wender at this meeting, who is the president of the ULMWP. Now has an application in with the Melanesian Spearhead Group, which is a sub-regional group of four states and one territory, which is New Caledonia. And we expect that this application will be heard soon, and the UNODP will finally have official standing as a representative of the people of West Papua, recognized by the Melanesian states, and therefore by the Pacific Islands Forum, and hopefully therefore by the United Nations. And so I think we're fast approaching the point we should have been at 50 years ago, 60 years ago, which is an act of self-determination by the people of West Papua. It may seem, to some it may seem hopeless, but we have to remember what happened in Timor-Leste. Very similar situation. Indonesia was the colonizer. The awareness of the issue of Timor-Leste, or East Timor at the time, grew all over the world. There were awareness at state level, civil society level. It led to increasing Indonesian repression and human rights violations in the territory until the point where it could no longer be tolerated, and there was an act of self-determination, and now we have a new independent state, Timor-Leste. This is the historical trajectory we are now on for West Papua, but we need, as has been said by the chairman this evening, or this morning for you, we need to be on the right side of history. We need to be ahead of the game and making sure that we are preparing the territory of West Papua for this act of self-determination, and eventually independence and the unfolding of the Green State vision, which we heard described so eloquently by Jojo. Here in the Pacific, we will continue to advocate for the self-determination of West Papua. In a survey undertaken by the Pacific Islands Forum, the collective of the 20 or so states and territories of the Pacific, with civil society among the populations, surveys are undertaken every couple of years as to what are the main issues people of the Pacific care about. West Papua is always in the top 2 or 3. And this is something that reflects the deep-held belief of the Pacific people. We have to remember that the Pacific region is also the region of the world which has the largest proportion of indigenous population within national populations. For example, in Vanuatu, I would say over 90% of people are indigenous. Same in Papua New Guinea, same in Solomon, same in Fiji. Now, Fiji is a different case with the Indian transmigrants. But most of the Pacific Island states have a predominantly indigenous population. And this is the link we feel with West Papua, which is the same. And we very much look forward to this story of West Papua, which is now gone into Africa as of 2019 and 2018, with the African states supporting this resolution for the UN Human Rights Commission to visit. And now it's getting to the European Parliament. We very much hope we can get the support of European states also to put the pressure on to take this historical trajectory through to its fulfillment. I would like to thank you again for the opportunity to speak to you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much to you, and thank you for doing this effort, for connecting from the other side of the world. And I suggest if there is someone that wants to take the floor a little bit to asking questions, please introduce yourself.
My name is Frank Schwalbe-Roth. I'm one of the founders of the German Green and was here the first Green in 1984, and now I'm a former member of Parliament. I would like to start with a proverb from China. If you have a stone, granite, the most efficient way of making a hole in it is not what most people think a hammer, but a permanent drop of water that is efficient. And I understand those in West Papua that they have doubts, will they really succeed? Because it's so difficult and so long-lasting. No, think and continue to think of this Chinese proverb, and think, and Ralph mentioned it, think of Timor-Leste. I followed in Germany and then followed here in the European Parliament the fight. We have so often met the representatives here, and finally it worked. And I discovered it was so difficult to bring Timor-Leste on the agenda. and I was in New Zealand because I taught there in Wellington University, guest lecturing on politics. The New Zealanders were much more informed because they're nearby. But finally, it is what came then the situation that everyone in foreign policy in Europe was aware of Timor-Leste. I'm thinking you can learn from ecocide because they are those fighter-like permanent drop of water, and therefore I expect from you, and as a parliament to organize it here, you have a terrible responsibility. You have done now an event, you are happy, but no. You have to continue with this. You have to have a secret agenda every 6 months, every 9 months, every 3 months, an event, an activity on West Papua. Otherwise, the people of West Papua will be totally angry and disappointed with you. And I've learned this from the Kashmiris. Most people here thought Kashmir is something linked to beautiful clothes. No, it is a territory. And they had even here an office. They had an office here in Brussels for 20 years. They had here meetings and continue, and you are wonderful president from Catalonia are involved in their fight as well. I made a test. You sent me the invitation for this event, and I spoke to 14 people of this event. And 2 already had heard of West Papua. It's terrible. And then I convinced six of them to come here. And I think the situation is the whole in Brussels and in the EU and among the political decision makers. They are not aware of what is happening here. They are not aware of the Indonesian put on pressure, ecocide, refusal for UN people to enter. But on the other hand, your situation is better than the situation of those in Bougainville, another territory which is fighting for independence not so far away from you. And I think, to finish, you should use that you're exotic. A lot of people have never heard of you. That means there is a natural curiosity among politicians, political leaders, public, civil society, media, and you have used this positively by coming permanently. And then it's not necessary that you are coming so high-ranking like this time with so many people, 1 or 2, that is enough. And you will see then the doors to the Commission, European External Action Service, are opening as well for you. And I think within the next 12 years you're independent. Don't tell it to the Indonesians, but I think it will happen. Thank you that you're here now. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. It's obvious there is, according to the all interveners or speakers, there is a lot to be done. We have some tools. We start to do it. To people to protect their fundamental rights. So is someone who wants to add something else?
Well, Carlos, just,
yeah.
But please, I have a request for the key speakers. I promised my people who came here with the 6 that I would make a photo of them with you, and they promised me they would put it on Facebook.
Okay. Maybe some of you want to add some remarks.
I'm responding.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Just very briefly, just express my appreciation to the Federation of the. Oh, sorry, I'm Clara Concerti, one of the Catalan MEPs, the one that entered by the Brexit accident. So now I'm just want to express that I'm very glad that you came, and we just, of course, Carlos has expressed that forcefully, but I just want to add that you certainly have our support. And in our case, I think it's, we want to support you, but we also find that by supporting you, we're supporting ourselves. So it's your cause, but it's our cause as well. And just thank you for being here, and thank you for the work ahead. I firmly share the views of the person that spoke before me. I think that you will succeed. Thank you.
I think, first of all, I'd like to thank Frank for his comments, and maybe, as a UK parliamentarian, there may be since January 2020 slightly less reason for UK parliamentarians to come here to the European Parliament in Brussels, but this is my second visit in a month, and I'll be coming as many times as needed to push the cause of the West Papuan people here. And the reason, I think it's really important to restate why it's so important, why actually today the most important place for the West Papuan people isn't Washington DC or Beijing or Moscow or even Canberra. Canberra's traditionally very important, or London. It's Brussels, and that is because of the EU-Indonesia trade negotiations which are currently taking place. We have this twin track where we're talking about human rights and self-determination. Now, we've added the third track around ecology and the environment through the Green State Vision. But actually, the leverage that exists in the Indonesian government is through trade. And it's not acceptable now anymore for trade to be seen without the aspects of the environment, of human rights, and where people will require self-determination to give them the right to free self-determination. And that's why here, this place, the European Parliament, the Commission, is so important. And I was very technical in my speech, but the Vice President of the Commission has made very good noises, but it's up to MEPs, up to the Parliament, to turn those noises into real concrete actions. And that's why it's simple, and that's why we're here today, to launch the chapter of the IPWP in the European Parliament. And I'm really pleased, Ralph in particular spoke about Timor-Leste. I met with the ambassador to London, the new ambassador to Timor-Leste. It's always a pleasure to meet ambassadors from small countries. You get to talk about interesting things like how can they find a flat in London, because it's difficult, and placing us, I'm sure Brussels is the same. Whereas, if you're talking to the ambassador for very well-established countries, they don't have those sort of questions. So it's always interesting for those human contacts, but also to talk about the history, the track they took in the current relationship. And the most important thing, actually, I took away from my conversation with the ambassador from Timor-Leste is that relations with Indonesia now are much better. And that's because the settled will of the people of Timor-Leste is enacted. They have good trade relations. The human rights issues do not exist as they did before. And that same relationship can exist in West Papua, rather than being a sword in the side of the Indonesian government. I'm saying this directly to them. And they can, instead of having the relations they have now and being an international pariah, they can move beyond that and allow the people of West Papua those human rights and that self-determination.
Thank you. So I think it's clear that this house is your house, and we are expecting you again as a full members one day of the European Union, more at large, and also to the west of Europe, not only in the west but also to the east. Someone wants to add something else? Please, feel free.
Yes, and thank you, Mr. Bustamante, and honorable speakers, honorable guests. My name is Rakiap, and I'm the international spokesperson of Free West Papua campaign. And I just want to briefly highlight the upcoming G20 this November in Indonesia. We all have clear in mind what is happening in the east of Europe. the situation in Ukraine. And I want all of us here, including those who are looking from home, to imagine if the entire world, the global north, the west, would support the Russian side, in this case, training the military, supporting the Russian government while they're committing the operation in Ukraine. Can you imagine that? That would be worse, right? But that is exactly what is happening today in West Papua. The US, European countries, Australia supporting and training indigenous Indonesian military so they can oppress the indigenous people of West Papua. Exploiting our resources, the world's largest gold mine, the world's largest tropical island. Because the blindness of the world in such a frontline area, that's how the climate crisis could occur. And that's why we've launched a Greek state vision. So I hope the people will, and especially those who are living in the countries of the G20, will hold the governments accountable for the reason how they are acting in a good way, supporting the people of Ukraine, not forgetting the people of West Papua when they are visiting, the respective government are visiting Indonesia in November this year for the G20. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. One of our goals is to convince other MEPs to join your efforts, our efforts, in order to put pressure on the Commission, on the Member States, to highlight this issue, because it's not a local or a domestic one, which is one of the main answers if you ask big powers. No, it's a global one. That's a fact that concerns our world and our way of life. And for this reason, it's also a European matter. It's also a matter of this House, the European Parliament, and it's a matter that concerns the European Commission efforts. So I was very happy to read the answer from Josep Borrell. Really didn't expect such clarity. It's not usual in the normal answers from the Commission concerning that issues, but we must recognize was very clear and committed. So we must follow this path that the European Commission has opened. And I invite all of you, and we will do also this effort to convince, to attract all MEPs to join our cause and to celebrate another event showing the results of that effort. So thank you very much for attending, and well, long life to West Papua.